Hello everyone. I figured I'd do another Ready M.B.M Pioneer video showing kind of the progression of how they manufactured their tractors over the years, the little subtle changes they made. I'll do a little walk down the line and then I'll come on back. Now for wheel wise, they made the optional rubber, or later on it was standard rubber, about late 30s and on till about 46 when they quit producing these tractors. They also made the wide steel, the short wide steel, and they made the extremely tall steel, which I believe those are like 26 inches tall roughly, and this also has the higher spades on it versus these that have the lower spades. A simple way of looking at how old the tractor is when you walk up on one is how the wheels put together. If you actually have rivets binding the rolled pieces of metal together, this is an older wheel versus one that is seamed by a weld like this one here. One with rivets I would say is about 1930 or older, where the welded ones are 1930 and after from what I can tell. We'll go on back and we'll do a little short tutorial on M.B.M produced tractors. Now M.B.M actually stands for Mould, Boudet, and Meyer. There were three guys that started a business which appeared to be kind of shortly lived during the 1920s, and from what I can tell, Pioneer or Ready bought them out somewhere around 1926. Mould was the gentleman that actually produced the Ready, or not the, I'm sorry, said that wrong, actually produced the M.B.M. He designed it when he was going to school at Marquette, and Wilborn, who produced the Ready later on, was actually his instructor or worked at the school and bought the patent from him, from what I can tell in patent histories and stuff. But the M.B.Ms are known to have a cast iron gas tank bracket like this one. They'd have an oval tank instead of a round tank like the newer model has over there, a round tank. These always had a squashed oval tank. They always had this size steel wheel. I have seen some that were not steel and cast. I've seen some that were all cast. Don't really know the history on that. This is a 20-inch wheel, and that's the same as that wheel, 20-inch, even though the hub is different. I'm not really sure what designates the hub design being different, which one's older, which one's newer, but both of these tractors were era of 1918 to 1926-ish. That's what it shows on paper from what I've been researching. The first design was made about 1918. He applied for the patent in 1922. James Mould did, and he was granted the patent under the M.B.M name in 1926. Not really sure where the serial numbers sit on these. This is another gas tank bracket that I have from actually this tractor. The number on this one's quite low compared to the other one. This one's looks like 231. So if I had to say if one of these brackets are closer to the 1920s, I'd have to say probably that one is. You'll see a lot of these at shows sometimes that have holes back here. That was actually for this air cleaner bracket to bolt on, which connected to the carburetor. Another thing with the flywheels for an M.B.M is M.B.M flywheels were only 10.5 inches, whereas Pioneer flywheels or Ready flywheels were 11. So this flywheel weighs a little more. What they did with the later model Pioneers was they double key weight them here and in the crankshaft so that the flywheel would stay on. The earlier flywheels were known from being not probably precision balanced. They were known to always crack out or they'd destroy the crank, and the one that this came off of the crank is pretty destroyed. But they got a set screw here that I believe they added later, and then where the keyway is here, it actually busted out completely down in here. So this flywheel is pretty much art at this point. I'll show you the breather. The early M.B.Ms had a rear breather on the back of the gearbox. This would mount where your mag plate would sit right here on this plate, and your breather sat right here. The holes lined up, you bolted the breather on. Later on, in the late 20s and the 30s, they moved the breather to the center of the tractor like this one. They just ran a little simple rain cap on top, whereas by the mid 30s, they started putting an actual real breather on to keep the water out. Another way of dating your tractor is this style lug. This style lug is probably more about late 20s, early 30s, whereas what I've been finding, this is the more predominant lug in the 1930s and on. And you can see them down here also. These tractors share the same lugs, and this set of steel has the real high lugs on it. They're like a whole nother inch higher. This tractor's sporting the rubber. It's probably about a 1940 and after. Still has a Pioneer flywheel, which they never changed one to say ready that I've ever seen. This one still says Pioneer. But the handlebars on this are all steel, not wood. And that seems to be pretty prominent in the 1940 tractors. Also has more of an L-shaped clutch handle, whereas the older ones just have a single straight handle. The mags, I think this is a Esselman mag, if I remember right, whereas the one on the back of there is Bosch, and that's also what M.B.M ran, was a Bosch. Now, the real late tractors in the 1940s, like the one with the rubber there, that would most likely would have a Fairbanks Morris on the back. Just something to look for. They could have always changed it out. People could change anything they wanted to make things work down the road. Another thing to look at is carburetors. Earlier M.B.Ms and earlier Pioneer and Reddys ran Ford style carbs off of a Model T like this one, and you also have a real predominant elbow in here. I would say this style intake and carb was ran from the get-go from maybe 1918 all the way till about, I would say, 1928, 1929 from what I could tell. Then they went to the more S-shaped elbow like what's on that tractor. It's not so sharp of a 90. It increased the airflow a little bit more, and they opened it up. This tractor I would say is about a 1927, being with the spades, and it's also what I call kind of a half-breed. It's still sporting an M.B.M flywheel, but yet it is tagged as a Reddy now. In 1927, from what the paperwork states that I've been looking at, Reddy or Pioneer acquired a larger factory to mass produce these. And from what I can also tell on paper, since the patent was granted in 1926 to mold, I'm guessing about 27 is when Reddy probably purchased M.B.M or the tractor rights from M.B.M to produce their own tractor. The other thing Reddy changed was the shifter. On most Reddy design tractors, the shifter lever right here that goes down to the actual drive and the transmission is on the right side of the housing, whereas the early M.B.Ms were on the left side, as you can see here. This is another reason why some of the, kind of jumping around, but this is another reason why some of the hardware would come loose on these tractors. They didn't run lock washers on the flywheels or on the crankshaft side here. They just ran these little brass washers with bend over clips. Every one I've ever taken apart, none of the clips are ever bent over to lock the nut. I understand that wouldn't really stop it unless you had this in between a jam nut. Then you could lock the jams with this, but they're kind of assembled wrong from the get-go. I don't know if they just didn't know what the tabs were meant to be used for, or if they didn't want to bust out and buy lock washers at the time, or if lock washers were really even... Lock washers were probably in existence in the mid-20s, but that probably would have saved some of their flywheel designing flaws. A lot of these housings and other miscellaneous castings that I've seen by them, I know there's some talk that they were built by only one foundry in the Milwaukee area, but I beg to differ on that because I see different casting insignias on some of these castings. I'll walk over by the handlebar where I know there is one over here. On this handle over here, there's a little, kind of like an hourglass little logo down there, kind of filled in. From my research, that insignia seems to be Federal Malleable, which was in the Milwaukee area, not far from where the production was of these. But then you'll look on other things, and I've even seen Motor Castings logo on some of their castings, which they were in the Milwaukee area too. So it seems like they bought and purchased from a lot of different small casting manufacturers of the area at the time. Another major difference on the M.B.M design versus the Ready design, Ready ran tin housings on that part, where the only thing tin on an M.B.M were the little side panels right here that would bolt on to the housing to cover up the cast iron gas tank bracket and the cast iron cooling shroud right here, where they ran a full tin housing. Another difference was the cylinders on an M.B.M. This ring is always smaller versus Ready or Pioneer production one, because if you take a Pioneer one, it will not bolt, it will not slide in here like this one does. They're about maybe a ½ inch larger, so you can never put a Ready cylinder onto an M.B.M. Another quick way of identifying age are your two different guide wheels there for the tool carriers. You can see on the other tractor over there the tool carriers also wheels. The straight spoke one seems to be more 1930s and after, whereas the twisted spoke one is more 1930s and older. Another way of looking at these tractors is on these caps right here. If you have the cap, you know it's probably 1926 to 1927 and after, somewhere in there is when they started going with the 5-bolt hub, where the earlier M.B.Ms did not have that. They would just slide on. You actually had to remove the whole wheel and hub together. They ran that style with no name probably until the late 30s, and then late 30s and beyond they actually were putting Ready on the caps. So that's another little way of looking at these things and trying to get a date or a year. Some of them did not come with the oil can holder. That was optional equipment until about 1928, I believe. Same thing with the dust covers over the axles. That was about 1928 or so when it became standard equipment. So you can have it on an older tractor. You don't know whether it was optional or not. That's pretty quick for my little tutorial here. Like I said, these also ran the oval gas tanks, unlike the round. The gas tank, I believe, switched about 1930-ish, late 1920s to 1930, maybe 29 or so. They switched to the round fuel tank, and then the round fuel tank will always say Ready on it with your serial number. I guess from what I've also read from employees that have worked there, you can't really go off the serial number on the tank for a year, because I guess this tin and the tank were stamped as they made the tin and the tank, since this is all one unit soldered together. And then they just bolted them on the tractor. So technically this tin could get misplaced out of sync from the way the tractor was built. So just necessarily because the number is lower doesn't mean the tractor's actually older. It would be within reason, but like I said, they built these and numbered these before they put them on the tractor, from what I've heard from a past employee. Another neat thing, they always kind of had problems with their castings cracking because they were probably over hard or something, but just quality control probably wasn't that good back then. It's real common for these handlebar castings to crack. It's real common to see those hub covers cracked and they salvage welded them, and when you take them apart you'll see the welding inside of them or something that they did just to get them off the line. But this one is kind of neat in particular because they must have been having so much problem with cast that they actually switched over to bronze. This one's actually a full bronze bracket. I've also seen it on some of the cultivator and tool holder brackets to be bronze. That one there doesn't necessarily have it, but I have seen it. I hope this little video helps you out in identifying your Ready and maybe get you a little closer in the year of what your tractor is. Thanks. Bye.